Communication needs more than mastery of language structures. While learners can benefit from knowing structures, meanings, and functions, they must be able to choose and apply them appropriately, knowing what to say and when. They must be able to negotiate meaning with who they are interacting appropriately as per the context. A communicative approach recognizes the functional and communicative potential of language and attempts to account for its creativity and uniqueness. In this 15-minute video, we'll look at what the communicative approach is, how it can be effective, and what communicative activities do and look like. We'll look at how, as learners carry out communicative activities, they move away from working on what to say, which traditionally might entail mimicry or memorization, to consider more what to do with language in varied, realistic contexts. The principles of a communicative approach are that in task negotiation, learners use, modify, and acquire language in meaningful contexts as they develop communicative skills. Active learning, learning by doing, enhances cognitive engagement. Hearing or reading authentic input, for example, from multimedia resources, classmates, friends, or other sources, allows learners to store language in their brains for access and retrieval. When students work in cooperative teams to complete learning tasks that require communicative interaction, the interaction functions as a catalyst that promotes language acquisition. A communicative approach emphasizes a form-to-meaning connection, teaching grammar within contexts through communicative tasks. Positive feedback entails confirming correctness of learner responses, while negative feedback entails error correction. Learners compare feedback information with their utterances. Anxiety, self-apprehension, and nervousness are common in language learning. Language learning needs to take place where learners are off the defensive. Van Eck's model for language learning objectives focuses on what learners will do, in what situations, what they will talk about, topics, and what forms they will use, functions. A functional view is of language as a vehicle for the expression of meanings while performing real-world activities. Speakers are aware of what they must do with language, what their role is, and what they're talking about. Here are some examples of functions. Imparting or seeking facts. Expressing or asking regarding intellectual, emotional, and moral attitudes. Getting things done, suggesting a course of action, or advising, or asking somebody to do something. And socializing, for example. Regarding the other what, that is, what speakers talk about, there have been a number of lists of topics and notions developed. Here, Van Eck presents a list of topics. Personal identification, house and home, profession, free time, travel, relations, health and welfare, education, shopping, food and drink, places, and weather, for example. To further the discussion of what people talk about, we can include examples of notions. These categories represent an effort to list things speakers talk about. Time, quantity, space, person, place, modality, evaluation, argument, rational inquiry, personal emotions, emotional relations, for example. On the left, we see a function-based lesson. It includes, for example, talking about yourself or starting a conversation. The lesson has a dialogue with examples of the language people use to carry out these functions. Learners would identify the examples of the functions and add to them with examples from their own experiences. and then move on to initiate their own unscripted interactions. On the right is a notion-based lesson. The theme is clearly identified. There is vocabulary and audio that ultimately inspire and support discussion on this topic. This situational or theme-based lesson includes a picture, relevant vocabulary, and points of departure and topics for discussion or composition. Activities can be developed to offer opportunities for learners to practice and expand their base of functions in activities that provide situations and topics to talk about. But there's one more aspect of communicative interaction: the speaker's role. To complete the picture of interaction, we turn to Vanek's description of the social and psychological roles learners bear. Of course, there are sub-roles and linked roles. Social roles, for example, may include stranger to stranger or friend to friend, subclassified as private person to official, or patient to doctor or nurse, or asker to giver. And psychological roles, for example, neutrality, equality, sympathy, antipathy. And finally, just before we look at examples of activities and activity types, we will also consider teacher roles. The teacher is a needs analyst, determining learner needs and learning styles to inform activity development. The teacher is a facilitator, setting up communicative activities, giving and supporting instructions. The teacher is an advisor, supporting learners during communicative activities, paraphrasing, confirming, giving feedback. And the teacher is a group process manager, managing transitions between activities, pointing out alternatives, or leading debriefing. Speakers have a choice of what to say and how to say it. If activities are tightly controlled so learners can only say something in one way, the speaker has no choice and the activity is not communicative. Activities should give speakers choices, opportunities to negotiate, and involve feedback. Errors are tolerated and seen as a natural outcome. In developing communicative competence, the activities will foster learners' abilities to vary language use per context, produce a variety of text forms, and use communication strategies to maintain communication. Information gap activities provide an opportunity for extended speaking practice. They can be very motivating. Furthermore, they activate many useful sub-skills, clarifying meaning and rephrasing, for example. Typical types of information gap activities might include describe and draw, spot the difference, jigsaw readings, and listenings and split dictations. In information gap activities, learners are missing information they need to complete a task and need to talk to or negotiate with each other to find it. In this gap fill, pairs of students take turns asking questions to find out the missing information. Student A starts and needs to know what year George St. Pierre was born in and may ask, when was he born or in what year was he born? Student B has that information. Student B would answer and then it becomes student B's turn. Student B needs to know where he was born and may ask, where was he born or in what country was he born or in what city? And then it continues, A, B, A, B. Students asking questions and answering them. In this information gathering and sharing activity, the class is divided into 4 groups or teams. Each team is randomly given one of the 4 pictures, each part of a 4-part story. Group members choose one of 2 roles, hosts and gatherers. Hosts for each team are instructed to stay at their table, never show their picture to gatherers from other teams, and to answer all questions they are asked. Gatherers visit the other groups and ask questions about pictures until they are confident they understand what is happening in the pictures without ever seeing them. Gatherers return to their home table and share their findings with their team's hosts. Each team then tries to determine first what number in the story chronologically their picture is, and then identify which part of the story each team holds. Jigsaw tasks are an excellent way to integrate the skills, as learners read or listen to a text and speak and listen to others to reconstruct the information in the text or audio. For example, the methodology of the previous activity with 4 pictures could be applied in a reading class, with groups of learners each having different sections of the text of a story. Each group, in a sense, becomes experts of their part of the story and move from group to group to explain what happened in their section. Then, learners collaborate to try to put the whole story together. In opinion gap activities, everyone receives the same input, which elicits a range of personal preferences from learners, or opinions. The goal is to inspire conversation through this opinion exchange. In groups, in this activity, learners study requests for funding, making suggestions based on their opinions, and collaborating to achieve a consensus on a course of action. Role-play activities give opportunities for learners to practice in different social contexts, where they can determine what they will say. The next slide presents an example of a role-play activity. In this role-play, the group's collective role is of manager of a ski resort. In the first card, the problem is presented. A customer is unhappy. Learners work together to determine the best response and follow the links. At each new card, new decisions are required, and learners collaborate to work through the maze. There's a great potential for adaptation and follow-up. Different group mates could read or act out responses. Learners could write reports about the events or their decision-making processes. Or learners could read about or present on customer relations. Games can be very motivating. In task completion activities, learners use resources and skills they have to complete activities. In this traditional children's game, one player, Granny, stands at one end of a playing field. The rest of the participants line up at the other end. The object is to tag Granny without being seen. When Granny turns her back to the field, she shouts an action verb, for example, run, hop, or skip, and players run, hop, skip, or jump towards her. At any point, she may turn around and shout, stop running, stop hopping, whatever the verb was, and the players must freeze and hold their positions for as long as she looks at them. Anyone caught moving must go back to the start line. So, learners alternate between giving and receiving commands or instructions. When they get back to the classroom, they can list or report on what they did. I ran, I jumped, or what they were doing. I was skipping, I was jumping, etc. A communicative approach posits that the function of language is to allow interaction and communication, which leads to fluency. Learners learn a language through using it to communicate, particularly if they are supported in gaining the means to perform language functions. The goal of classroom activities is authentic, meaningful communication, and meaning can be created through collaboration, which involves creative construction and trial and error. I hope you've enjoyed this video and are able to apply some of its concepts in your own teaching. Thank you so much.